Hello there, Drew Hannish Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And today I am doing an Australian whiskey. This one is called Starward Twofold, and I have actually tasted this in the past. This bottle is actually a little old. It's been around for about a year and a half when I did an interview with Dave Vitale from the distillery, and we chatted a bit about the history of Australian whiskey, which is a fascinating history. Basically, about 1901, laws changed and Australian whiskey slowly started to fade away because if you weren't a big distiller at that time, you couldn't fit in under the law. And so they basically started watching all these distilleries disappear until 1960s or 1980. Slowly, it went to nothing. And it wasn't until recently that Australia's been able to get back into the distilling world. This is a whiskey that is 60% wheat and 40% barley. It is a 40% ABV whiskey, and with all of that wheat in there, about a 3-year age on this, I would expect probably the barley to be taking over a little bit, and the wheat to maybe just be softening it. Interesting to note too that we would be looking at grain coming from Australia, which means we might get some different characteristics out of it that we wouldn't expect. And I look back on my notes on this to see what I pulled out of it before. I think I was just coming out of COVID at that time. And interesting that I did not pick up on the main note that I'm picking up here. Now I get baking spice, get a little apple. I get a lot of apricot, a lot. Cheers. Has a very nice mouthfeel to it. Again, not a lot with the barrel. A lot of apricot, maybe a little bit of a caramel note underneath, but it is so light underneath there. There's a little bit of a gingery note that comes in, and then as you come into the finish, there's almost like this espresso note on the back of the palate. It's interesting how that comes in. There's some grain notes in there as well. Sometimes with American wheat, I get kind of a cherry note. Not necessarily getting that. I'm getting much more in the way of maybe a little wine note in there. As I understand, these are aged in red wine casks. And so I am pulling a little bit of a wine character in there, but it is mostly apricot. That is standing out big time. And that was not a note I was pulling in on my first tasting. So either it's evolved in that bottle, or I just wasn't tasting what was one of the really strongest flavors that I'm pulling out of that particular whiskey. It's nice, it's light, kind of creamy on the palate. It's not heavy. It's definitely not something I would put above maybe a 3 in terms of on a 5 scale of weight, but there's a nice feeling to the whiskey when it hits your mouth. Maybe it's sort of the same thing that you get out of an oat whiskey, where oat whiskey kind of adds an oily, kind of silky kind of a feel to the whiskey. So nice. It was nice to come back and try this again. And I'm going to be I've got 2 other ones that I will be doing tastings on coming up sometime this year. So they too have been waiting a long time for me to dip back into them. I hope you enjoyed this. Have you had Starward? What do you think about it? Give me your comments below. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video. And until next time, cheers and Slainte. A little red apple in there too. What's amazing about this is how vibrant the fruit is. It is really, you feel like you're biting into the fruit. That is how clear those flavors are in here. Wow.